Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. My name is Samir Hassan, and I'll be your host this evening. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. I pray everyone is safe, inshallah. And for those who are sick, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala heal them, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to protect our community, our brothers and sisters all around the world, inshallah. Since the pandemic began over a year and a half ago, the MIA has utilized the virtual mosque to connect with the community on a regular basis. And inshallah, we're endeavoring to do the same again tonight. Tonight's event is titled The Road Ahead. As we continue to mourn the loss of more lives taken, Brother Faisal Kutty will discuss Islamophobia, the aftermath of the terrorist attack in London, and how we move forward. Sheikh Ismael Mukhtar will speak about Islamophobia in Manitoba, and Brother Younus Imam will speak on safety. Before that occurs, though, we're going to begin the program with Quran recitation and translation. Alhamdulillah, Sister Safa Filiu has generously volunteered to recite for us tonight. Sister Safa spent most of her life in Winnipeg and recently moved to London, Ontario. She is a grade 11 student. Her parents raised her to love the Quran from a very young age, and mashallah, she's completed her ijazah. She will be reading from Surah Al-Imran, ayat 168 to 174. And as I noted, she will also be translating it into English. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Sister Safa.
Sorry, I'll be starting from ayah 169.
169? Okay.
Yes. ولا تحسبن الذين قتلوا في سبيل الله أمواتا بل أحياء عند ربهم يرزقون فرحين بما آتاهم الله من فضله ويستبشرون بالذين لم يلحقوا بهم من خلفهم ألا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون يستبشرون بنعمة من الله وفضل وأن الله لا يضيع أجر المؤمنين الذين استجابوا لله والرسول من بعد ما أصابهم القرح للذين أحسنوا منهم واتقوا أجر عظيم الذين قال لهم الناس إن الناس قد جمعوا لكم فاخشوهم فزادهم إيمانا وقالوا حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل فانقلبوا بنعمة من الله وفضل لم يمسسهم سوء واتبعوا رضوان الله والله ذو فضل عظيم. That's for the translation. Never take those killed in the way of Allah as dead. Rather, they are alive with their Lord, well provided. Happy with what Allah has given them of His grace, and they feel pleased with the good news about those left behind them who could not join them, that there shall be no fear for them, nor shall they grieve. They feel pleased with blessing from Allah and grace, and the fact that Allah would not let the reward of the believers be lost. Those who responded to the call of Allah and His Messenger even after they had received the wound, for those of them who did good deeds and feared Allah, there is great reward. That is those whom people said, the people have gathered against you, so fear them. It increased them in faith, and they said, Allah is fully sufficient for us and the best one in whom we trust. So they returned with bounty from Allah and grace, with no evil having even touched them, and submitted to the pleasure of Allah, and Allah is the Lord. Allah is the Lord of great bounty.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much, Sister Safa. At this point in time, everyone, I'm going to introduce you to our first speaker, someone who we all know, an individual who makes me smile every time I just generally think about him, the Sheikh Ismael Mukhtar. He needs no formal introduction, as I noted. What I will tell everyone is that he has a book coming out shortly, inshallah, titled Manitoba Muslims. He will be speaking specifically to us about Islamophobia in Manitoba, and he has a chapter in his book specifically addressing that topic. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you, Brother Samir. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. It was very tragic to witness what happened in the city of London, and it makes us sad, and it raises many questions in our mind as to why this is happening. Why would a young person at the age of 20 would purposely kill such a wonderful family? We pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless them with His mercy and with His grace. And we also pray and hope that this tragic incident will be an eye-opener for our fellow Canadians everywhere to see and clearly understand the deadly and far-reaching consequences of Islamophobia. Islamophobia is a global and a national phenomenon. And perhaps people might think of Islamophobia as a Quebec problem, or maybe after what happened in London, an Ontario problem. But the reality is it's a national problem. And Manitoba is not an exception. As Brother Samir mentioned, my book, which will be coming in few weeks, Manitoba Muslims, the History of Resilience and Growth, I have a full chapter, talks about Islamophobia and traces Islamophobic incidents from the 1970s until today. And there are many instances and many stories that I have related in this book. And for those of you who are interested, hopefully when the book is published, you'll have a chance to read it and hopefully have a better understanding of the challenges we face with Islamophobia. Now, to give more time to our respected speakers, I will focus only on 4 points. First, one of the Islamophobic tactics that we have seen many times is to hold Canadian Muslims responsible for what happens globally. Since the Iranian Revolution, and this is speaking recent history, since the Iranian Revolution 1979, following the Salman Rushdie affair, the Gulf War invasion, the Khartoum controversy in Europe, September 11, and so on and so forth, every time something happens overseas, Muslims in Canada are held responsible, and you see spike in Islamophobia. And in Manitoba, we have witnessed many instances where people would be calling the mosque or attacking the mosque, or incidents where Muslim women were verbally abused or physically even attacked. So unfortunately, there is a double standard here. When something happened in Ukraine or Poland or Italy, Canadian Italians or Canadian who are from Ukrainian heritage are not responsible for that. Nobody will conflate what happens there over the local community here. But when it comes to Muslims, it's a different story. And unfortunately, we live in a world where there are so many political tensions all over the world. Every time there is some incident somewhere, you will see the media flocking to our mosques. You will see some incidents happening either in the mall or in the school or in the workplace, and so on and so forth. So there were many instances of this nature, which I have related in my book. The second point I'd like to make is that Islamophobia tries to associate Islam with terrorism. And one incident happened particularly, and this was in 1990. An international conference was held in the University of Manitoba. The title of the conference was Islamic Terrorism in the 1990s and its threat to North America. At that time, I was a student in the University of Manitoba. I was a member of the MSA executive, and we met with the organizers of the conference. The lead person was Professor Peter Sinjan. An MSA president at that time was Dr. Ali Khan. We had a lengthy discussion explaining to them that associating Islam with terrorism and the title of the conference was deeply offensive and deeply erroneous. But unfortunately, despite all the efforts that we made, they were adamant to use this title, associating Islam with terrorism. Now, the title caught the attention of a member of parliament. His name, from what I remember, was something Assad. And he brought the issue in the Canadian Parliament. And he said that this was not fair, this was not right. Nobody would talk about Christian terrorism or Jewish terrorism or Hindu terrorism or Buddhism terrorism. And he said if a conference was to be held with that title, then there would be an uproar. But unfortunately, it was a convenient way of blackmailing and attacking Islam. And unfortunately, this very conference was held here in Winnipeg. And despite all our efforts, the organizers adamantly refused to change the title. And what was disturbing was that this was not a conference organized by lay people. These were supposed to be experts in Islamic history, probably experts in the socio-political dynamics of the Middle East, yet they found it appropriate to use this very offensive and very disturbing title, and this was in 1990. And imagine what happened after September 11. After that, of course, it became a norm for the media to conveniently use this very disturbing and offensive term. Thirdly, another unfortunate incident or incidents we have seen in Manitoba is acts of vandalism to our main mosque, the Pioneer Mosque in Winnipeg. Between 2001 and 2006, there were at least 4 major acts of vandalism in our mosque. In addition, of course, I'm not counting the minor ones. The biggest one of them was in 2001, and this is before September 11. This happened in February 2011, sorry, 2001. And basically what happened during the night, somebody or a group went and smashed the glass around the entrance of the mosque. They sprayed graffitis everywhere, Nazi symbols, and so on and so forth. And it was very disturbing and very hurting because the mosque is a special place for us. Another incident that also happened in the month of Ramadan, which was again happening in the month of Ramadan, and to a sacred place, was deeply disturbing. And of course, there were many, many other incidents. And as I said, since I only have a short time, I only highlighted few of these instances. And hopefully for those of you who are interested, there is a much, much more of the story of what happened in Manitoba. But one thing I should also say, after every incident, whether it was the acts of vandalism of the mosque, or after the Rushdie affair, or after September 11, there were many who were, expressing their hate, but those who were supporting the community and standing with the community, even recently after what happened in London, there was an outpouring, support from the larger community, from the different faith groups. And that is also an encouraging sign, and that makes it clear that our fight against Islamophobia is not just limited to us. We have many friends and many supporters across nation, and I hope together we can eradicate any form of hate. We are not only concerned hate directed at Muslims, but hate directed at anyone, so that our nation, our country will be a country where, regardless what your color, what your ethnicity, what your faith is, you will be treated as an equal citizen, and that you will be judged, as Martin Luther said, not by the skin of your color, but by the content of your color, of your character. Thank you very much. Jazakumullahu khairan.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. At this point, I just want to let our audience know, both on YouTube and Facebook, if you have any questions, please note them in the comment sections. We're going to have a portion of the event at the end of the three speakers, where we're going to open it up to Q&A. So inshallah, if you have questions, please put them there, and we'll get to them as best we can. At this point, I'm going to introduce Brother Faisal Kutty. MashaAllah, Brother Faisal has a very impressive bio. I'm just going to highlight a few of his many achievements. Brother Faisal is a Muslim lawyer. He's a law professor. He's been teaching for more than a decade. He's a writer and a public speaker. He has extensive experience in interfaith, intercultural dialogue, and is an expert in on the Muslim community, Islamic law, Islamic culture, national security, and how they intersect. He has spoken widely as a keynote speaker, and he's been on TED Talk. Believe the topic was why conversations matter. Additionally, for the past 12 consecutive years, he's been included in the Muslim 500. That is a list of the world's most influential Muslims, mashallah. For more information, please visit his website at faisalkutty.com. And at this point in time, I'm going to be asking Brother Faisal to share his wealth of experience and knowledge with us about Islamophobia and how we can do our best to move forward, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Jazakallah khairan for that generous introduction and with that great talk by Sheikh Mukhtar. He gave a good perspective on the situation in Manitoba, and he also talked about the fact that we critique, deficiencies in the Canadian system doesn't mean that we're criticizing this country. This country is the best country in the world, but of course, there's lots of improvement that needs to be done, and advocating for it is not anti-patriotic or anti-Canadian. It's in fact patriotic, because we have a duty as citizens in a democracy to critique and improve the country for everyone, as the Sheikh said. So everything we say here is not to show us as victims or to complain about Canada. It's to make Canada better than it is, inshallah. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. Now, the issue of Islamophobia, as the Sheikh very accurately pointed out, is a problem that's not limited to Canada. It's a global phenomenon. But one of the things is, why is it that in the last 5 years, within the last 5 years, there's been 2 mass killings of Muslims in North America? Mass killings defined by the FBI as more than 4 people killed at one time. And so that both of them happened in Canada, one in Quebec, the mosque shooting, and then more recently, the tragedy in London, Ontario. How is it possible in a multicultural society? Well, what's happened is, as the Sheikh started out and addressed, the question of the demonization and dehumanization of Muslims. And there's different people that are playing roles in this. You have politicians, you have media pundits, you have fake news journalists who have been, advancing this. And you saw that prior, even before, as the Sheikh said, even before 9/11, in the 90s, when the whole Iranian Revolution happened, right after Afghanistan, you see them looking for a new enemy for the Cold War, after the Cold War, and it was a green menace. So this was targeting of the Muslim world, so you had to now project the us versus them. As Edward Said talked about in his book Orientalism, it's this, the Western world or certain elements in the Western world have always treated and always looked for the other in the Eastern world. The other, so different from us versus them mentality. And that needed to be fueled. And the whole idea of the clash of civilization that Samuel Huntington wrote about is a build-up to that there's a clash of civilization. Islam is a civilization that cannot be, it cannot mesh with Western civilization. Completely false ideas. But of course, these have gained increasing currency. So that's what is happening. That's the big picture. Now, that big picture, if you look at the Canadian context, and now you see many politicians and many individuals in Canada promoting that. So let me just give you one example. I'm just going to have Brother say whoever's manning the multimedia to put up a tweet that was just sent out today, I believe. I don't know if you see it yet. So, excuse the first part of the expression there. Holy blank. Erwin Kotler, Canada's special envoy on preserving Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism, just shared an article by Tariq Fatah titled "There's No Islamophobia in Canada." So basically, that's an article published by Tariq Fatah, who people know is always basically promoting hatred against the Muslim community. And this article is really promoting hatred against Muslims, because right after the attack in London, imagine publishing an article that says there's no Islamophobia in Canada. And the subheading there, if you see it, clearly says that Muslims are allegedly told to repeat 48 times a day to condemn or to put down Christians and Jews. Okay, completely false. Now, this is published in a newspaper, and many people say, what's the Toronto Star? But you know what? The Toronto Star has a broad readership of people who actually go and vote. And they're going to go and vote based on this hate that this Tariq Fatah, who they identify as a Muslim, look, this Muslim guy is saying that Muslims do this 48 times a day. So, of course, we're the haters. Okay? Now, so he tweets that out, and that has hundreds of retweets, and it'll have many retweets, and it'll get all over. And then the article is getting circulated. And then all of a sudden comes Irvin Cotler, who is respected in Canadian society, a former MP, former minister, and Trudeau has now placed him in charge of free speech issues. He comes and retweets this. So what is this? What is happening? It's a demonization of Muslims. And can you imagine somebody writing an article saying there is no such thing as anti-Semitism? There's no such thing as anti-Black racism. Nobody would tolerate it. Editors would not publish that. So we need to hold these people accountable, because we can't just dismiss this as, oh, that's Tariq Fatah. Oh, that's the Toronto Sun. No, because these are people, they have followers and they have readers who will take this and promote this. And that's why something like what happened in London could easily happen again. Because when you demonize people, that's what happens. And there's many instances of this. I just give you this one example just from today. I didn't even have to go look for it. It was set, I just opened my tweet and I was like, oh my God. So you can see this is how this happens. Now, what can we do? What can we do about this? We have to, number one, educate ourselves. Okay, knowledge is power. Because when people get confronted, when they're told there's no such thing as Islamophobia, you need to have knowledge. You need to educate yourself. And there's plenty of resources out there. NCCM puts out resources. I'm sure MIA has resources. The Sheikh Mukhtar is writing an article. He's going to have a chapter on this. Read. We need to be readers. We need to be consuming knowledge, because knowledge is power. When you can talk back to people, and you can talk back with truth and facts, people have to listen. Maybe to your face, they may not, but back in their head, they'll be like, well, that's factual. There's facts here. Okay. So educate ourselves. We each need to do that. I am so disappointed many times when people, I engage with people and, I'm fully immersed in these things. So for me, I'll start a conversation and they'll be like, huh, what happened? What do you mean Islamic, this happened? What do you mean they're saying this? What do you mean this piece of legislation is in the works? What do you mean this happened? So we're not aware of what's happening. So we are clueless that we can't even say what the state of affairs is of our community, or how we are being targeted, who's targeting us, none of these things. So we need to, number one, educate ourselves. Number two, don't back off on this term, Islamophobia. Okay, so Islamophobia was a term that's used. It's nothing new. What they do, they try to project this image that this is a new term that Muslims have come up with. Excuse me. We haven't just come up with this term. This term has been there the first documented use of this term was in 1910 by somebody who was studying the treatment of the French, the Algerians, the treatment of the Algerians by the French. In 1910, in French, Islamophobia. That's the word that was used. So it's not something we just came up with today or yesterday or in 2016 when Iqra Khalid was introducing a motion just to study the issue, or after 9/11. So it's from 1910. Okay, that's a documented fact. Then the first use of it in English language came in 1985 when Edward Said used it. And let me give you what he said about Islamophobia. And I'm just going to quote him. He said that Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, come from the same source. It comes from hostility to Islam in the modern Christian West has historically gone hand in hand with anti-Semitism and has stemmed from the same source and been nourished at the same stream. So this is something that's not new, and we shouldn't back off. I see many people now, because of the opposition, they'll say, well, you know what? I won't use Islamophobia. I'm going to use anti-Muslim hate. Who cares? At the end of the day, whether I'm killed because of Islamophobia or anti-Muslim hate, the person is dead. The person is targeted. The person is harassed. The person is discriminated against. We should not be debating and spending all of our time engaging in debating whether this term exists or not. Okay, so when somebody big brings us up, just point blank ask them, are you also studying the linguistic roots of anti-Semitism? And are you studying the linguistic roots of anti-Black racism? Well, Islamophobia is an accepted term. Scholars have accepted it. Many governments, agencies, and governments have accepted it. So let's move on. Let's not debate and discuss this issue. Stand firm on this issue. Okay. Number three, what we need to be doing is engaging in interfaith dialogue and intercultural exchanges. because the commonalities between us and others, okay, has to be explored and highlighted for people. It seems like it's why do we need to do this? Unfortunately, the reality is they've painted such a negative image of Islam and Muslims that we have to do the active work of bringing out the positives. Many times I post on LinkedIn some positive action that Muslims do, or on Facebook or whatever, and people say, well, why do you need to identify this guy's religion? And my response to them is, because every time a Muslim does a negative thing, you always highlight it. So we need to highlight the positives. I don't want to be doing it. I don't think I should be doing it. But the reality is I must do it, because all of the negative coverage out there is so profound and so deeply entrenched in people's head that we need to now unlearn this. Okay. We need to get people to unlearn what they know about Muslims and Islam and relearn new things. And so this is a job that each one of us has to do. I try to do this on a daily basis by posting on Facebook and LinkedIn. I don't have time to do this. And people ask me, why do I keep doing it? Because we all have to do our part to do that, to project a positive image of Islam. Unfortunately, that's the reality out there. Number 4, look for and work with allies. We need to look and work with people, because we can't do this alone. This is a battle that's going to take a lot of effort, a lot of convincing, a lot of persuasion. And so when you have people persuading for you, it's much better. Let me give you an example. I taught, I teach sometimes courses in Islamic law at different universities. I teach other courses, but as an extra, I teach Islamic law. And it's an extra burden on me, because it's like, I don't have to teach this, but it's a seminar course. And I teach it because I realize that many of the students who take, a vast majority of them are non-Muslims, or many of them are non-Muslims, and they're interested. Some are curious, some want to know more, some have spent time in the US, especially when I teach there. Many of them were Marines or soldiers or posted overseas, and they want to really learn the theory. And so they come and take it. And then I've seen, after they complete the course, when disputes happen on Facebook, I see them using what I taught them to defend Islam and Muslims. So rather than me defending, they actually, it's really interesting to see a former US Marine saying, no, that's not true. Here's the source for this. Here's what it really says. Here's what Muslims believe. Here's what Islam teaches. There's a spectrum of opinion, blah, blah. And so for them to defend us, it's much better. But we need to have those allies. We need to educate ourselves first, and then educate the people who will be our allies, people who we interact with, people who trust us, and who can help us advance this message. And again, as I said, highlight the positives, right? Number 6, I think we need to get into arts and entertainment. And many of us are into this now. And this is how many communities have changed their perception through comedy, through stand-up comedy. So Brother Samir wanted to do some stand-up comedy. So maybe it's a way for him now to use that to connect with people, because people are chill, people are relaxed, and you can connect with them, and they realize, hey, this guy's a Muslim guy, and he's just like us. He's should we have unfortunately, the reality is we have to do this. We have to show this, that we are no different from other people. And another thing, since a great deal of Islamophobia is based on the notion that Muslims threaten Western values, we need to project Muslims doing the normal day-to-day stuff. That, again, we identify them as Muslims: the Muslim doctor, the Muslim lawyer, the Muslim fireman, the Muslim this, the Muslim that. That we are not just people who are sticking to our own communities, doing things only for the community. We are there. We're serving you. We're the doctors who are serving you. We are, the paramedics. We need to highlight these things, right? Perceptions often also based on the idea that Islam and Muslims are sexist, right? That idea needs to be rebutted. Muslim women have to be brought to the forefront. They're the only ones who can rebut this presumption, right? Rebut this idea that it's all just a male chauvinist thing. We need to really have them at the forefront. That's another thing that we need to do. We need to project that our community is not a monolithic. We have diversity, and we have great diversity. Even in Islamic jurisprudence, there's great diversity. So there is no one single Muslim, right? There's a diversity of opinions in the Muslim community. There are Muslims who are conservatives, Muslims who are, liberals, Muslims who are NDP, Muslims who are independent, right? So this has to be conveyed, because when I go and speak in audiences, non-Muslim audiences, the way they ask me questions, it seems like we have this one monolithic. And so I tell them, no, this is not, there is no one particular type of Islam. And to me, I'm shocked, because I know, for instance, there's lots of different Christian groups, Jewish groups, but they think when it comes to Muslims, it's just there's a one type of Muslim, right? So there's a good type, there's two types, there's good type and bad type, right? The quote unquote moderate Muslim who's good, and then the other practicing Muslim who's not so good, right? So I think we need to shatter that, and we need to address that. We need to support our institutions, NCCM, Muslim Association, Manitoba Islamic Association, whichever organizations are doing work in this area, we need to really, really support them financially, because the amount of work they are doing right now and they need to do on this front. NCCM, for instance, is in court challenging Bill 21. The niqab and the hijab, the hijab, really it's religious symbols, but for the purposes, really, it's really catered attacking Muslim women. And I'm deeply disappointed that Prime Minister Trudeau did not speak out on this issue, right? When he was asked the question, does he condemn it or does he oppose it? He refused to answer this. Why? This is a fundamental international human rights issue. And if we can't have our politicians who we think are on side defending this issue, then we're in trouble, right? So we need to really support these institutions. NCCM is out there challenging this in court, and we need to be supporting that. We need to call for a national summit. NCCM has called for a national summit, because this has to happen. When in 2016, when Iqra Khalid introduced M103, it was just a symbolic, non-binding motion to study Islamophobia. It was opposed. Imagine, just to study the issue, it was opposed. Then when the actual report came out a year later, so they passed the motion with 91 MPs opposing it, including the majority of conservatives, including the sitting leader of the Conservative Party, O'Toole, opposed it. It passed, thank God, because there was a liberal majority. Then in 2018, when the report came out, they made 30 recommendations. Only one mentioned the word Islamophobia because of all the fear and all the objections and all the reaction. And out of those 30, only one of those recommendations has been adopted. That's pathetic. You had this study, report comes out, 30 recommendations. One of them is adopted. And what was that? That was to declare January 29th as a day to commemorate, Islamophobia because of what happened in Quebec. That's the only one. And then people wonder why Islamophobia is happening in Canada, because nothing concrete has happened. So a national summit is required. My last 2 points, we need to report and document these things. There has to be reporting happening and documenting, whether through NCCM, through other organizations, and the federal government has to initiate a data collection on this. Because anytime we bring this up, they say, well, we don't have statistics. We don't have numbers. We have anecdotes, but no numbers. Well, how can we have numbers when there's no mechanism to report these things? Many people I know call the police to report a hate crime, and they don't take the report, or they dismiss it, right? So how could you know that how can you say how many incidents really are there? There are very few incidents, they'll say, because they're not reporting them, because it's so much of a hassle. The hurdles and the steps you need to go through to report it is problematic. We need to take action, whether it's through the police, through various agencies that are out there. We need to follow through with them, the courts, the media. So for instance, with the Toronto Star, we need to write to the editor, say, how can you publish this article? Toronto Sun, how could you publish this article? We need to, forward this to the police to say this is inciting hatred against the community, right? We need to then follow up with the police, follow up with the media council. If the media council doesn't, if the Toronto Sun doesn't do anything about it, let's check if Toronto Sun is part of the media council, Canadian Media Council, and make a report with them, right? This has to be addressed, because if it's not, this is not going to be addressed, it's going to keep reinforcing this in the minds of people, hearing this, that we are told 48 times a day to curse or condemn Christians and Jews. What do you think the average Canadian who reads that is going to say? Oh, well, maybe they deserve this kind of treatment because they're hating us. Hate breeds hate, right? So we need to confront that. So we need to do many, many things, and I'll try to deal with some of this stuff in question and answer. I don't want to go on too long. But before that, hopefully what we need to be doing is to work is, we need to be doing these things because we don't have, unfortunately, CARE a couple of years ago, if you want to put up that pill that they came up with, CARE, they had to put out a pill, multi-symptom relief from chronic Islamophobia, right? Unfortunately, we don't have this yet. If some of the chemists here or biochemists who are working here can come up with this, then we can cure this illness. But until that illness, we come up with this kind of a vaccine or a pill to cure this, which is not the reality, unfortunately. We need to do all of these things that we went through, and many institutions are out there that are championing, how to deal with and tackle Islamophobia. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us, and I will try to address some of the issues in question and answers. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah khair, brother Faisal. Yes, unfortunately, that pill is not available. The magic pill, something we're all searching for a number of ailments. Before we transition to our next speaker, I actually just wanted to first and foremost say thank you for enumerating all those various steps that we should be taking. I think you thoroughly went into some actionable steps that we could take to try to move this issue forward. And this program is being recorded, so for individuals that weren't able to note everything, you will be able to listen back and hear all those great suggestions. With that said, if I could just ask you a question. I know we're going to be dealing with the questions later on, but one issue that you raised that sticks out to me, looking for allies, critical, extremely important. However, one thing that I've personally noticed in the community is some individuals, they really like to bunker down, adopt the silo, approach, and just kind of keep within themselves. So how do you best recommend that we kind of shed ourselves of that behavior and really do more to engage with our Christian and our Jewish, etc. Neighbors in an effort to secure and foster stronger alliances?
Very good question. I think there are many, vast majority of Canadians, vast majority of people out there are well-meaning, well-intentioned people. Unfortunately, they've been misinformed in some cases. They have wrong information in some instances, and they don't know enough. So it's our job to reach out to them and to educate them, and then to bring them on as allies. And there's nothing problematic about this. If you remember, one of the first, and I wrote an article a few years ago on this, the first instance of Islamophobia was really when, you remember, the companions of the Prophet, they ran to Abyssinia, and they were being chased by, I think, the first set of Islamophobes, really. They chased them there, and they went to the king, and they said, hey, these people are bad people, they're this, they're that. They were preaching Islamophobia. The first instance, documented Islamophobia. And what did the king do? The king said, well, let me hear from them. And when the king heard from them, he realized, wow, you know what? They have more in common with me. I'm not going to listen to these Islamophobes. He didn't use those words. I'm paraphrasing. Let's not listen. I'm not going to listen to these Islamophobes. I'm going to listen to them, see what they have to say. And then he became the ally of the Muslims, Negus. Right. So we have history. Every time Muslims try to do something, many of us say, well, what would the Prophet have done? What happened to the companions? What did they do? Well, this is what the companions did. They went and looked for allies. Rasulullah sent the companions over there. Right. And then they had to convince and persuade the king, who then became their ally. So we need to do the same thing that was done. And we have plenty of people out here who are willing to listen, who are willing to give us an opportunity, and then let's work with them And I think there's plenty of opportunities in Manitoba, various church groups, various rights groups, various unions, even humanist groups. People are looking to do what's right, justice, right? So that's what we need to do. We need to look for allies that way, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. And once again, I think I've opened up the floor a little bit, so I'm just going to just address one question we received from YouTube from Tasneem, sister Tasneem. How do you address people like Tariq Fatah and Hirsi Ali, who the media promote to prove that Islam is at fault and essentially validate the treatment that we receive?
So I think it depends. If they cross the line into hate, okay, so we need to be really monitoring this, right? So there's two avenues, really. If they cross the line into hate, then we need to bring it to the attention of the police. I mean, it's not our job to parse it and see, hey, did it really cross? But for instance, this article that he wrote, I find that this is inciting hatred against an identifiable group, because basically he's saying that this is what actually Muslims really believe, when it's false, it's a lie, and it's there to incite hatred, especially after the killing. Okay, so something like that needs to be taken. We need to take that to the police and say, look, this is incitement of hatred. Okay, same thing for Hirsi Ali. If she does something to incite hatred, I mean, the laws in the U.S. and other places are different. In Europe, they have pretty good laws on that front. But in Canada, again, we have incitement laws. So if they incite, we need to keep bringing it up. And first few times, you're going to keep bringing it to them, and they may not do anything, but there's going to have to have a file kept, right? So that's something. The other thing we need to do is really, if they start defaming people, some people have to take action. Brother Muhammad Faqih, who was owner of Paramount, he sued one of these Islamophobes, and he succeeded, right? So, people like that, we need to step up. And alhamdulillah, he did a great job of standing up on principle. He spent a lot of money doing it, but he did it for the community, right? So we have people like that who are willing to do that now. That's another thing. The other thing is we need to really challenge these editors and people who give these people platforms. And we need to tell them, we need to ask them, look, would you tolerate this about other communities? And document it, expose them. We have many, many talented writers, columnists, and people in our community who can write, who can produce videos, who can do whatever. We need to start using these things. And we've been talking about this for years and years. I'm an old guy now, and I remember doing these lectures back in the day. Alhamdulillah, we've come a long way since then, but we can still do a lot more in terms of getting people to challenge these people and write. We need to really get to these editors who are putting these things on. And I submit a lot of articles, and sometimes when things are a little controversial, they're afraid to publish them, right? I wrote some stuff about the Palestinian-Israeli issue. Normally, my editors would publish those things. Many of them were like, we don't want to publish them. Why? Because they realize the backlash they're going to get. So why aren't they getting a backlash from us when this article went? I'm still in shock about this article, because to me, it's like this is asking people to really target us. Okay. And so when people go in, IIT a couple of days ago, I'm not sure if it was Islamophobia or not, but these two individuals go at the mosque, Islamic Institute of Toronto, and they were trying to break and enter. Cops, thankfully from people's side, police showed up. But again, why were they doing that? I hope it's not Islamophobia, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was, because of reading articles like this. That's what happened. So this is how we confront them at these levels. And I think we need to start doing that more and more, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair, brother Faisal. We're going to, at this point, inshallah, move on to the next speaker, but we will be returning to questions and answers later on. At this point in time, I'm going to introduce Brother Younus Imam. Brother Younus works in emergency management in the banking sector. As part of his master's in disaster and emergency management, he published research. He published and researched on improving safety in and security at mosques, and endeavors to assist in that particular area through the Salam project. So at this point in time, I'm going to introduce Brother Younus, and inshallah he can assist us with that particular topic. Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Assalamu alaikum. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Am I speaking too loud, too quiet?
Just right.
Okay. So assalamu alaikum, everybody, and obviously I want to take a moment of silence for the victims of the London attack. And so today I'm going to go right into the presentation. If I could, I'm going to kindly share my screen. 1 second. Okay, so just give me 1 second to set up. Okay, so just confirming, can everybody see the full presentation, active shooter preparedness and security training? Brother Samir?
Well,
Yeah, okay, good, perfect.
see it before. You just switched it up right now, but we could see it before. Yeah, there
Okay,
you go.
perfect. Okay, so today we're just going to be covering kind of vehicle ramming attacks and personal safety. Okay, so we're going to, because obviously it's such a topic of interest, we're going to talk about vehicle ramming attacks. We're going to go directly into that. So now ISIS and white supremacist groups, they actually use vehicle attacks quite commonly, right? On concerts, shopping malls, just different venues. They've been used on protests, with the Charlottesville protest being one of the key issues in 2017, where a white supremacist group drove a car through a crowd and killed a woman. Right? So now the idea is, what can you actually do to prevent such things? Now, unfortunately, the London attack, as in terms of terrorist attacks, is quite unprecedented. Because generally speaking, when a vehicle attack happens, it is on a sort of a gathering of a sort, some sort of event. And so the thing is that for these events, you would be able to put barriers up or checkpoints, right? Things like if you see benches and planters and trees, different bollards they're called, right, at different sort of public areas, they're actually there to stop vehicles. So sometimes they're just very creatively designed architecture, right? The problem with the London attacks is that it really is, a random pedestrian walkway. What are we going to do? Start, arming every single sidewalk with all these barriers so a vehicle attack can happen? I don't know if that's entirely realistic, but what we can do is more and more awareness. So we need to look at warning signs. So, signs of erratic driving, ignoring rules of the road. If typically somebody who's about to commit an attack, they're not going to be caring about a lot of these things, and they're going to be going straight for their target, right? Other cars might, and that's why it's important to have make sure that if you're seeing something like that, like, a suspicious driving behavior, horn, because it might actually make aware other people who are about to be victimized by that. We don't know, obviously. Now, with the Afzal family, obviously we don't know, obviously it's pending the police investigation when it concludes. We don't know if they had any warning signs or, if it really was just something they couldn't react to in time. But these are some general principles that we can apply. When it comes to a masjid having an event, I think it's very important that they understand that it's important to minimize the number of entry paths for a vehicle to come in, and you can do that through creatively using different barriers. And this can be done obviously on a more temporary basis if it's like a parking lot, right? And then making sure there's like one checkpoint. You want to have access control over that space. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about awareness and reporting, and I apologize. I've not been able to listen to most of the presentation because I'm actually at work right now. I'm on my lunch break. But I know that Brother Faisal and Sheikh have probably been talking about this a lot as well, right? It's very important to report crimes against you, right? Now, I'm going to use an example. The Jewish community reports every single incident that they receive for the last several decades. And they have multi-million-dollar lobby groups. Groups like CIJA, they have like I believe somebody's told me they have a $30 million operating budget, right? And they are there to support and represent the Jewish community, right? And there's plenty of examples that we can see over the last several years where reporting has made the difference between life and death. I'm going to start with the Quebec City shooting. there was a pig's head that was left outside the mosque prior to the incident. There were 7 reportable security incidences that occurred prior to this, and yet no action was taken, right? And it's really, really important for us to know that we need to report these things, right? Now, the New Zealand shooting. The New Zealand shooter came into the mosque 3 times beforehand. He was wearing shalwar kameez, the traditional Pakistani clothing, and he actually pretended to pray, do his prayers. He inquired about schedules and security, information regarding it, like the security cameras and the different security technologies that were available. And then on top of that, he flew a drone over the mosque beforehand. He also looked up prayer schedules and all these different floor plans. And what that did is that he was able to determine what was the best time to attack. He was also taken to hospital beforehand because of firearms injuries. He had accidentally, a bullet fragment had gotten into his eye, and guess what? The hospital didn't report it to police. Right? He was training with firearms, getting ready for the attack. I'm going to end off this part with a positive example of Islamburg, New York. This was in January 2019. A group of 4 men took, I think, 20 to 30 guns and about 3 or 4 improvised explosives, and they were ready to shoot up an entire predominantly African-American Muslim community in the state of New York. And what happened was that because one high schooler reported that there was something weird going on, the New York Police Department was able to stop those potential attackers. They were planning to target about 500 Muslims, all in all. So this is the importance of reporting and how much of an impact it makes. I'm going to go over now awareness. So there's a gentleman called Jeff Cooper who's a legend in the United States military, and he kind of trained all the law enforcement and military in the stages of awareness. Right? So it's important to understand that you should have different stages that you're ready for should an event occur. So typically most people are usually very completely relaxed and unprepared. That's usually, you really should only be that when you're asleep, but a lot of people are unfortunately a little bit too comfortable with this state of mind. They're not looking around, right? I'm not trying to tell you to be paranoid all the time. That's not what I'm trying to tell you. What I'm trying to tell you is to be relaxed yet alert most of the time. You don't think something is going to happen, but you're being aware. You're being observant. So how many emergency exits are there in your building? Do you know how many people are in the area in general, right? Just pay attention to different things. That's all it is, right? If you're on the road, do you see a car, are you checking your blind spots, right? These are very simple things. Then we move into code orange, which is a specific alert. You identify something that may be of interest. It doesn't have to be a threat. You don't think anything suspicious, but you're just gonna look at this person and analyze them a bit more. Then there's red mode, which is you see multiple indicators of suspicious activity, right? So now you're like, okay, hang on a second, something bad is about to happen, right? The person might be trying to hide something. They might be looking at you differently. They might be yelling at you. So now is your time to plan on creating distance, use escape routes, think about breaking visual contact. Okay, so I'm going to use an example of how this kind of plays out. So this is an example of a Muslim sister that was given to me by one of our urban planning professionals. So Fatima's leaving the library after dark one night, and as she walks to her car, she notices that someone is following from close behind. She turns toward a well-lit car park where there's other people watching and surveillance cameras around. And guess what? The person who is about to do something criminal, right, may have been he disappears, right? And I'll use this illustration, right? So she is taking the precautions of going into areas that are well lit, have lots of video surveillance and people, because guess what? Criminals, they're cowards. And they're only going to attack what they deem to be easy targets, people who are alone and isolated. This is why we recommend that if you feel that you're under threat, guess what? Don't go out alone. Go in groups, because that's how you avoid being targeted. So I'm going to describe to you, I'm going to show you this now. I obviously can't see the comments right now, but take a minute and try to see what this image is. This image is not a niqabi. This is actually a man in niqab who tried to invade a Detroit mosque in 2019 during Tarawih prayers. This person went around for 5 minutes and investigated. And then one of the sisters tried to ask, do you need any help? And then he ran away immediately. And he was doing surveillance. And there's we're getting, in the Salam Project, all of us are getting multiple reports from different mosques of people who have tried to go, and they're looking around, they're checking the security cameras, they're doing all these things, right? As if they're about to conduct a criminal act. Sometimes there's robberies of the donation boxes, all these things, right? I know another mosque where a guy came in dressed in a niqab as well, trying to mingle with the sisters. And as it turns out, the sisters actually fought him off and chased him out of the mosque, which is awesome. Okay, so I asked this quote before, but here it is again. How many exits are in this building? How many exits are in your home, in your mosque, in the shopping mall that you're going in? Do you take note of that? I've been to mosques where there's actually about 15 exits, and yet most people could only name the exit they came in, the entrance they came into, and one at the back, right? It's important to understand that your brain during an emergency goes on autopilot. So you're only going to remember the exits that you actually walk through, right? So it's important just so if you're at a new mosque, go and check out all the different exits, because you never know how important that would be. Okay, so it's important that, so now we're going to talk about what the police agencies in this country call run, hide, defend. In America, it's called run, hide, fight. They're the same thing, just a little bit of a rebranding for Canadian audiences. So during an emergency, your brain uses shortcuts, right? So it's important to, just, the problem is that during most shootings or these different violent criminal actions, a lot of people just freeze or try to play dead. And unfortunately, it's not a strategy, as we can see with the New Zealand shooting, it's not a strategy that's worked very effectively. The problem is that you need to train your brain to, okay, run, what do I do? Try to get away to safety. So try to break visual contact, line of sight, and understand that most shooters are not well trained, and even the most well-trained shooters can't hit moving targets, right? And also understand that false alarms are a great training opportunity. So if there's somebody pulls the fire alarm, this is a good opportunity for you to pretend that it's an actual emergency and train yourself. Don't oh yeah, I just got to do this to fire code. No, this is a good opportunity to actually train yourself and get ready for that, right? We can use the example of Rick Rescorla, who was in charge of safety for Morgan Stanley and the Twin Towers during 9/11. And he trained every single member of the Morgan Stanley staff. And because of him and his training and using false alarms, he was able to save 2,687 people during the Twin Tower attacks. Okay, so where can you hide? If you can't run away, find a place to hide, minimize noise, and turn off the lights. Have heavy barricades like bookshelves near doors. There's door locking devices that a masjid can purchase that can basically seal off a door and prevent it from being used, and you can use that. Make sure you have your phones on silent. This strategy was very useful during the Parkland shooting incident, where a shooter came into the room, into the school, and started shooting at people, and a lot of teachers basically used this strategy, and they were able to successfully evade the shooter. Now understand this, on average, law enforcement takes 5 to 6 minutes to come to the site of an emergency. This is kind of a statistic across North America. That means that for you and your masjid, or wherever you guys may be, you guys are the people you guys have to save lives at that time. The police is, they're trying their best, but they are a certain time away, right? And studies in disaster management show that people who are on site at the time of an emergency They make the biggest difference. That's you. So, you know, you guys are the ones responsible for protecting your brothers and sisters, right? Now, defend. So, I want you guys to think back to the New Zealand shooting and think about, do you know if do you know how the shooting ended? So, what happened is that a gentleman named Abdul Aziz Wahabzada, who is a 48-year-old Afghani gentleman, he basically saw what was happening. He got his kids to safety, and then he picked up a credit card machine and decided to charge at the shooter and throw it at him. The shooter dropped his gun, and what happened was that the shooter basically had other guns, but he was too scared of this one Afghani gentleman. And basically, he got chased around the car parking lot several times, right? And basically, he eventually ran away and drove off, and then he was intercepted by the Christchurch police. You need to understand that most active shooters are not very well trained, and also it's quite easy for a group of people to overwhelm a person with a gun, no matter how advanced or how destructive that gun is. Right? We have multiple examples of different people at different events fighting back and, you know, actually, overwhelming the attacker. From 2000 to 2013, the FBI did a study. 21 shootings were stopped by unarmed civilians, right? And these are mass shootings, by the way. We have the Denver school shooting, which 3 guys jumped on a kid who was shooting in the classroom. The Norway mosque shooting in Beirut, where a guy went and he got 2 shotguns, heavy body armor, and a helmet. He killed his sister, and then he went to a mosque and started shooting. He didn't kill a single person or hit a single person because a 65-year-old Pakistani man who was a retired Pakistani Air Force officer, he jumped on him and basically wrestled him to the ground. Imagine, you know, a 65-year-old man being able to pin down a 20-year-old with shotguns. We have the Long Island rail shooting where a guy was moving from train carriage to train carriage and was stopped by, a number of people. And then we have the Seven Kings shooting, where in London, England, there was a Tarawih prayer. And after that, during that Tarawih prayer, a guy came and started shooting at the crowd, and then everybody turned around and just charged the shooter. Understand that a gunman can only focus on one target at a time, right? Use and throw improvised weapons, right? If everybody attacks together, the shooter can't stop. And it's actually easier. The larger the gun, the easier it is to stop this person, right? You can use light and sound, turning on and off the lights. And most importantly, you need to understand, this is your masjid. This is your home, right? It's your responsibility to protect it, right? This person is coming in here. He doesn't know it as well as you do, right? So be brave, have courage, right? If there's no other choice, if running and hiding is not an option, and you need to take a stand, don't be afraid to attack. I'm going to show you. So a lot of people ask me a lot of times, oh yeah, this only works for young people who are males, right? Well, actually, working in emergency management, I've seen with my own eyes several times where people who are half the size of these attackers, who are female, and they're stopping the attackers, right? We'll see people who, everybody would underestimate and would say, oh yeah, she has no chance of stopping this. They stop whole gangs of armed guys, right? And this is not, I'm not making this up. I've seen this with my own eyes, right? And this is an example, of course, of a 30-year-old male in San Francisco who tried attacking an Asian woman, right? And the Asian woman fought back so viciously that she sent him to the hospital, right? And this is just the example. If you have the will to fight back, a lot of these people who are attacking, they're cowards themselves. Okay, so do you know where the nearest first aid kit is? Do you know where the nearest fire extinguisher is? These are questions to ask. Now I'm over by a couple of minutes, so I'm just going to stop here at Stop the Bleed, which is essentially it's a program that was developed by the U.S. medical community and promoted by President Barack Obama. And it's basically what happened is that a lot of shootings, we were finding out that civilians were not actually stepping in to help other people who are bleeding, right? and because they were too afraid to offer medical assistance. You need to know that if there's a knife wound or a gunshot wound, you can greatly reduce the chances of the person dying by applying pressure with a cloth. And the thing is that like it's very, very simple. Like all they're talking about is essentially stuffing in the cloth into the wound. And this has been used very successfully to save a lot of people's lives during these situations. Just a question, Brother Samir, are we good on time, or I can go into conflict de-escalation, but if that's not something that's realistic, we can just end there.
Perhaps we'll just stop here. We have about 15 minutes left, and I'd like to leave that open for questions and answers, if you will. But Jazakallah khair, Brother Younus. This is obviously a topic that we could really devote multiple hours to. And one of the questions that has just come in, I think it's particularly focused towards your section of the event. A question from Mamoon Shaban, indicating, is there any recommended self-defense training for our kids?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Obviously, like, self-defense and martial arts, I think they're like, I can't speak highly enough of how important they are, because they just teach your body and your brain how to react in such a circumstance, especially like not just like, doing, hundreds of kicks in a row, but also like, actually dealing with like, being in, practice fights and stuff, right? I think that those are really important to teach your body how to handle like under strain. There's a couple of different organizations that I can recommend. Like, for example, there's Vest Security Services. That's a Muslim brother who actually has a training company where he trains people in use of force and trying to, like, if you need to commit a citizen's arrest of somebody harassing or conducting a crime, you can do that. There's obviously a lot of martial arts that are very, very good, like boxing, Muay Thai, Krav Maga, which is surprisingly one of the obviously it's probably one of the best, in terms of like street fighting and self-defense. That is a pretty in-depth question though, and I don't feel that I'm 100% good to answer that in such depth. But there's a lot of options which I can definitely forward to you. There's definitely lots of expertise in that.
Thank you. And I know you're currently on your break from work, so we'll try not to keep you too long. But just a follow-up question. Other than turning into, Jason Bourne, just one of the things you pointed out, some of the, I guess, soft spots in our security at the local masjids. Do you have any, suggestions? Because I'm not quite sure how we can really do much to prevent these individuals who are dressed up in a niqab, pretending to be sisters, from infiltrating the masjid and, basically just walking in. So I'm not sure what we can do about that. And then secondly, your recommendation when you have, a brother, an individual who you believe to be a brother who clearly is not local, who starts asking questions about where your security cameras are, and so on.
Yeah, so the presentation I'm giving you right now is actually a smaller portion regarding personal safety for a larger presentation that me and my team deliver. We do cover security like training and basically setting up a whole security team and doing that. But just to do it briefly without going over time, I've pulled up the slide right here. So basically, it's important to you having a trained greeting committee, trained in conflict de-escalation and kind of emergency communications and procedures. So our idea is that we sort of so if you look at Shoppers Drug Mart, for example, right? Every single when you go to a Shoppers Drug Mart, there's always somebody at the front greeting you, saying hi, right? And just welcoming you, and this will be at a lot of different organizations, right? And the reason for having a greeter there is not just to make people feel safe and comfortable and nice and all that. It's actually there to screen out these sorts of people and to see what, like, what's going on. What happens is that if a criminal comes, what happens is that they have a certain goal in mind, right? And like the greeter sort of applies some sort of soft pressure by asking them, hey, how are you doing and stuff, right? And oftentimes these criminals will, like, their intentions sort of, at least they sort of come through in a certain way, right? They'll start behaving suspiciously and they'll start getting very nervous. So what happens is that having a greeting committee is very important, and we have a procedure where we have 3 people sort of approach somebody who's acting suspiciously, and then the first person will just talk to them and see what's going on, and we focus on conflict de-escalation to try to delay it, right? And then the other person starts taking notes on things like clothing, shoes, distinguishing features like facial features or tattoos or hair, right? And the third person goes and calls 911. And what happens is that, like, for example, criminals, what's really interesting is that criminals often don't change their shoes. We've seen this time and again, like it's a pattern. Criminals might change their clothing, but they'll keep the same shoes. And the idea is to call 911 and get police on site if they're acting suspiciously. We also have just very quickly, we also have a thing called controlled access, having somebody at the front and making sure they're only opening the door when somebody gets close by. Usually if somebody's carrying a gun or something, you'll be able to figure it out when they get close enough, and that will be enough time for somebody to raise the alarm.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. So at this point, I'm going to open it up to Q&A for all of the panelists. We do have one question that I see here from Sister Alexandra Marcel, and I believe it is, how should we approach or respond to other Muslims who we hear complaining about Canada and Western values? I'll toss that question over to either Sheikh Ismail or Brother Faisal, or hopefully both.
So what's the question? It's how do we respond to other Muslims who are complaining about Canada and Western values? I don't know what the question is asking. I mean, I've heard people say, well, first of all, before I answer that question, I wanted to thank Brother Younus for an excellent presentation. I think
Absolutely
that full-length presentation should be at every mosque, and not just this short version. I think you need to have an event just to have that. Like I totally didn't realize, I'm getting old, because I think when we talked yesterday, I didn't even connect that this is the same Younus Imam that I've been interacting with all the time. Like, okay, I feel really old now. Okay, so my apologies, because I should have figured it was you, and I know the great work they're doing in Ontario. It's I would recommend every single masjid invite them. Hopefully, after this pandemic is over, they should be physically present in your masjid, and telling you how to deal with this, because they've done this. They have a great presentation, and it's going to help people, because unfortunately I think these kind of things are going to continue to happen. I don't think they're going to slow down. So we need this great work that they're doing. We need to encourage that. So with that, I'll try to answer this question. So the question, I know people get confronted by the question, the reason they put down Muslims is because we supposedly don't follow Western values. What are Western values? Like, I take my Tim Hortons every day. So am I, following Western values? What is Western values? Trump gave the speech saying, we need to follow Western values. So what that brings in mind is the idea that we go back to Greek and Roman and Old Testament, and but people who study this have we've looked in these sources. There's no such thing as Western values. What is Western values? Okay, so there is no such thing. All societies, all civilizations have interacted with each other, and almost every single civilization has ideas of human rights, has ideas of dignity, because that's what they're trying to claim, that Westerners only have these ideas of dignity, respect, tolerance. All these things are supposedly Western ideas, because the rest of the world are barbarians. Okay, this is what we saw with the killing of the 215 children. Why were they killed? Or why were they mistreated in these residential schools? Because the Westerners were trying to take out all of this backwardness from them and enlighten them with Western values. Okay, so anybody who tells you that, there's no, don't even buy into this discussion or debate. Okay, just ignore them. I mean, I don't know if I'm answering the right question, but I see this all the time. Where like, you don't respect Western. Go back to your country because you don't respect Western values. If you mean imperialism, racism, sexism, slavery, and all those things, then I don't want those Western values. Okay, what we want is the basic things that every society has. Dignity, respect, human rights. All of them. Most societies have this, and so we are here to participate in that, and we're okay with those values.
And Jazakallah khair, brother Faisal. Sheikh Ismail, I'll just also ask if you can touch on that and a different twist on that question perhaps as well. I'm not sure, but perhaps the individual may have been contemplating, just a little bit of complaining, if you will, from your own brother or sister, kind of just saying, Western values suck, if you will, or whatever the case may be, right? Not so much from the non-Muslim telling us that we need to conform or adopt it. I'll just toss that to you, Sheikh.
Well, just very quickly, I would say that this comes from the us versus them mentality. I think we need to understand that there are universal values that we all share. And I think there is an understanding from perhaps some people that, Canada is a Christian white country and everything else is non-Canadian. And I heard, for example, sometimes in the mall, somebody on the member saying, don't be like these Canadians. And that's very troubling. I mean, we are also Canadians, and Canada is a multicultural, multi-faith country. And, there is no contradiction between Islamic values and Canadian values. So I think what's important for us is to educate our community and to engage also with the larger community, because when we are close to our own mosques and we don't interact with anybody, we are not civically engaged. We are not, all what we follow is just what happens overseas, and we are not really in touch with what happens in the ground here. Definitely, we will have this mentality of them versus us. I think this is our country, and our country is diverse. There is, there are shared values. There are things we Muslims do not share with others, and that's fine. This is the nature of the country. So I think education and engagement is the key to hopefully addressing this issue.
Perfect. We have another question here. I believe it's from Sister Suhaila Dahmani. She's inquiring, indicating that she's preparing a presentation and raise awareness about Islamophobia within her company. And she's wondering what are things to, flush out and things to avoid, or flash out and things to avoid.
I think one of the things is the whole denial. Okay, so the first thing, there's denial that this problem exists. That's which is what I started with. There's this hesitation to even acknowledge that Islamophobia exists. I don't know what it is, but it's just this belief that it's exaggerated or it doesn't really exist. So that's something that we need to really iron out here. I mean, even Aaron O'Toole, when the Conservatives voted against that, they actually published a report. When the Liberals came out with their report after the motion passed, they came out a report with 30 recommendations, and the Conservatives in 2018 came with a counter report. The report said there is no such thing as Islamophobia. So I was shocked when Aaron O'Toole actually stood in London and used the word Islamophobia. He finally acknowledged it. Okay, so in their report, they said there's really no such thing. It's just exaggerated. And plus, there's 26 different definitions of Islamophobia, so we should be not using it. And he actually told Prime Minister Trudeau, do not use this word Islamophobia. So I think it's going to go back after this, like this London incident. It's in the media and everything. People are talking about it. But again, it's going to recede to this discussion where there's this discussion about the origins of the word and all these things. So that's something you need to address, that, look, this is not just a made up thing. This is a reality. People face it on a day-to-day basis. And this is, and educate them about that word Islamophobia. And then going to, some of the things we talked about in this session, I'm sure it's online so you can get some of the points. And there's plenty of resources out there. Noor Cultural Center has an amazing website set up on Islamophobia. Lots of information there. NCCM has information. The Sheikh is writing a book with a chapter in it. So all these resources you need to get put together and share in this presentation.
Jazakallah khair. Unfortunately, we're right at the 9 o'clock mark right now, which marks the end of the evening. I know I have my own questions I'd like to ask, but I'll bother you fine gentlemen later on. I wanted to say Jazakallah khair to all of you for attending and listening, and Jazakallah khair to all of our speakers specifically for being so generous with their time and sharing their knowledge with us. So assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to everyone. And unless there's anything else from anybody else, we'll leave it at that.
Okay, assalamu alaikum.